Hello, everybody. My name is Kaya Urtela. I'm a facilitator at the CEF, and I will be facilitating this webinar that CEF is preparing together with PEFA Secretariat. I will first of all open a pool. It will appear on the right side of your screen. So I hope that you can already see it. And now you have time to actually vote. It asks you what job role are you, and it will give us some impression who is in the audience. Aha, we're already getting some first answers. Good. In next hour and a half, we will be discussing about the recent trend in countries who are placing issue of gender in their budget design, implementation, and evaluation. And in connection to this, we will actually discuss PEFA's dive into these global trends of placing gender perspective in budgeting. So we will discuss recently launched framework for assessing gender responsive PFM, and also first pilot tests. So not only the framework, but also how it was pilot tested in countries globally. So in Ukraine and also in Indonesia. With this, I would like to introduce our speakers today. First presentation will be delivered by Mrs. Urshka Zrinsky from PEFA Secretariat. She will guide us in a world of gender responsive budgeting. Then she will also present a framework for assessing gender responsive PFM. And then after this presentation, Maja Bosnic will take a floor in a webinar. She is a team leader of a GRB project in Ukraine. So she will share with us how this project in Ukraine is developing, what are the outcomes, and also how they have just piloted the PEFA's framework. Then afterwards, Romawati Sinaga from the World Bank in Indonesia will describe gender responsive budgeting developments in Indonesia that go back in year 2000. So she will share with us developments, experience in gender responsive budgeting, and also in the same way that Maya before, she will also present how they've been testing PEFA's framework. We would also like to include you, our audience, in this webinar, so to make it really meaningful. Many of you already attended our pool, which shows that many of you are involved in budgeting as well as in evaluation. You're also some representatives of international institutions. So right now I will close this pool. And I will open a second one, which will give us excuse me. So here is a second poll, which will give us some impression how knowledgeable are you already in gender responsive budgeting. So according to this, we will be able to adjust this webinar. So either we give more introduction to gender responsive budgeting, or see that you're already familiar, and then we can go even deeper. So many of you some of you are already attending this poll. Also in the chat, you are able to provide either comments, questions. So I would already now like to ask you to discuss, to use this chat option to describe what is gender responsive budgeting for you. How would you describe it in your own words? Just a couple of general rules also from me. So we are recording this webinar and the recording will be available afterwards. As I already mentioned, you can ask questions in our chat area, but please make sure that you send this question to everybody so that we will be able to see it and then afterward discuss it. Also, we already asked you to be unmuted during the presentations, but we really welcome also your contribution in person. If you're having some experience that you would like to share from our region, from countries that are experiencing GRB, or maybe even contemplating doing a framework assessment, then we are also welcoming you to connect us, to say something in person through microphone. So for this, we will give you time and then you can also unmute yourself. Now I will slowly close the pool. So if some of you still want to add your response, we can see that many of you are already knowledgeable in GRB. Some of you are saying that you have some reasonable knowledge. So I believe this is a good start for this webinar. Right now I'm closing a pool. It will close in 10 seconds. And I proposed that we start with the first presentation with Urška, who is already waiting.
Thank you very much, Kaya, for this introduction. I just now need to figure how I do the presentation, right? How I turn it on. So share content. That means...
Yeah, we can see your presentation.
Perfect, super.
Great.
So thank you very much, Kaya, and thank you very much for the CEF for organizing this this webinar and for reaching out to so many people. I'm really impressed that we have so many people interested in gender responsive public financial management. So in my presentation, I'll touch four different areas. I just want to give you a very quick overview of what PEFA is for those who are not familiar. Before I tell us how we in the PEFA Secretariat define gender responsive PFM, and then I want to use that definition to also explain some of our recent work on gender responsive public financial management and 9 key areas that we identify of PFM where we believe gender considerations could and should be easily integrated. And then right at the end, I'll give you some tips on how to stay in touch with the PEFA Secretariat in case you want to learn more about PEFA, gender responsive PFM, or are interested in conducting a PEFA gender responsive.
Urška, sorry to interrupt you, but just one thing. Can you move your mouse, your microphone closer to your mouth because you're going in and out with your sound a bit.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much, Alexander. Is this better?
This is great. This is much better. Thanks.
No, super. I apologize for that. No, great. I'm happy you can hear me now. So just very quickly, as I said about the PEFA program, so PEFA stands for Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability. It's a partnership program of 9 institutions. So we are housed at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., but we also have the European Commission, the IMF, and governments of France, Luxembourg, Norway, Slovak Republic, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom guiding our program. So these partners established a standard methodology for assessing countries' public financial management systems performance. And this framework, this diagnostic tool has been used globally very widely. So we have almost, I think now 160 countries applying the framework, both at national and subnational levels, with over 600, well over 600 assessments globally. And also the region that the CEF covers, Southeast Europe, I think we had most countries doing PEFAs, some of them 3-4 times already, and using the findings of PEFA assessments to strengthen their public financial management systems. So that's really it in terms of what I wanted to say about PEFA. So we can then later understand why PEFA, as a owner, as a guardian of the most widely used PFM diagnostic tool, decided also to dwell into the area of gender responsive PFM. So let me now give you a definition of gender responsive PFM. I see some of you are already kindly posting your views of what gender responsive PFM is in the chat. And I want to use, as I said, this definition to then go directly into how we understand it in PEFA and how we identify key areas of PFM where we believe gender considerations should be integrated. So here on this slide, you can see some of the most, I think, well-established definitions of PFM by the IMF, OECD, Council of Europe. It's also very similar to definition proposed by UN Women, who's done some instrumental work on this. And it's really all about, as I said, integrating gender in the way budget policies are designed, implemented, reported against, evaluated, and also scrutinized by Parliament. So gender responsive PFM recognizes that beneficiaries of public services funded through the budget have different needs, and that the way we design budget policies, both at revenue and expenditure side, as well as implement them, should take those different needs into consideration. To me, gender responsive PFM is largely about being able to collect sex disaggregated data, analyze it, which of course it's not always an easy task, and then use the findings of those analyses to inform your budget policy the decisions. So gender responsive PFM is grounded in the understanding that public budgeting decisions, as I said, and PFM systems that underpin them can affect the economic, social outcomes for men and women and can close these persistent gender gaps. But it does come down to having good sex disaggregated data and analyzing those. But what I've discovered with my work with country authorities, especially the work I done last year in the Pacific and the Caribbean, is that countries are often surprised by the amount of sex disaggregated data that there is. They often don't know that it exists, but it is collected by local schools, health clinics, you name it. But then it's really how do we use that sex disaggregated data for meaningful analysis and then using those findings to make an impact. Of course, PFM is not an only government's lever that governments can use to address closing gender gaps. We have other levers or tools such as legal system, having strong politicians using their power to address some of those gaps. But I think there's a growing research done by UN Women, individuals in PFM, especially the IMF in the last couple of years. And we now have this growing understanding that PFM should be added to the government's arsenal of tools that can be applied to address closing gender gaps. Just to make it clear what gender responsive PFM is not, it's not about separate budgets for men and boys. It does not require a new approach to PFM as such. It just recognizes that, as I said, beneficiaries of our public services have different needs, and that when we design our policies, we have to address that. And it's not only always about women's issues, although gender gaps for women do continue representing a global issue. But for example, the work I've done last year in the Caribbean has clearly showed that gender-responsive PFM should also be used to address men's issues. For example, in the Caribbean, there's this issue we discover with young boys not finishing secondary school. 20% of young boys in the Caribbean do not finish secondary school, although that's mandatory, which causes huge problems in terms of accessing labor market. There's evidence showing that that is connected to higher levels of crime and illegal activities. So gender-responsive PFM should also be used to address some of those issues. Before I go into what we do in the PEFA Secretariat, actually, now I already revealed it without going to the quiz, so I am super sorry about that. My quiz wanted to look at the number of countries that have applied gender-responsive PFM around the world. The data conducted and analyzed by the IMF now shows that we have well over 80 countries around the world at all levels of income that are undertaking some form of gender-responsive PFM. And there's been some amazing work done, for example, in the region of Albania, North Macedonia, Austria, and others in integrating gender in their public financial management systems. So let me now take you through the work that we've done.
Madalena has joined the meeting.
That we've done in the PEFA Secretariat, where we spent last year, so 2019, trying to identify key areas of public financial management where we think gender considerations could and should be integrated, and where we've seen global international practices, so countries' experiences in mainstreaming gender in PFM. So you'll see this on this slide, 9 key areas that we identified. You'll see that first 5 areas are really about budget preparation processes. So do countries integrate gender considerations in budget circle and so forth? Then moving to the implementation. So do governments have the capacity to track resources for gender and gender equality? Are countries reporting on what has been achieved? Are they conducting independent evaluations of their public services? And are they using the findings to further inform the design of their programs and services? And is also the Parliament involved in scrutinizing budget policies and audit reports to provide some meaningful inputs to the government in how gender considerations could be further strengthened and integrated in countries' PFM system? So let me now go into a bit more detail of what we're trying to measure with this new supplementary framework for assessing gender-responsive public financial management, which we launched recently, as Kaya mentioned. So that was done just in end of January. So what we do, we first look at during budget preparation, are countries carrying out what we call ex ante gender impact assessments? So are they capitalizing on sex disaggregated data to understand what the impact of new budget policies will be? As I mentioned, this is often not an easy task, but we've seen with countries around the world establishing quite sophisticated and well-articulated methodologies for conducting such assessments. For example, government of Canada has what it's called Gender-Based Analysis Plus, that helps them establish what the impact of new budget policy proposals will be, not only on men and women, but also on, for example, young, elderly, people with disabilities, and so forth. But in the region here, for example, in North Macedonia, government used this ex ante gender impact assessment to revise their approach to the way they allocate subsidies for farmers. So, for example, last year, the government of Macedonia launched a new subsidy schemes for farmers that no longer requires owning a land as one of main criteria, which means that 90% of women farmers can now apply for government funds. Another area of PFM in the budget preparation process that we identified should include incorporating gender considerations is public investment management. There's a growing research now on how that could be done, mostly anchored by OECD, and I do encourage you to have a look at some of their work. The way we define it in PEFA is we say that when countries perform cost-benefit analysis of proposed new projects, are they also considering gender impacts? And we've seen countries around the world kind of more and more going into that direction. For example, the municipality of London, I mean, in London itself, whenever they build a new metro station, they're now trying to consider how gender should be integrated in that. Based on their research, women in London metropolitan area are 3 to 4 times more likely to use public transportation. So it's important that new metro lines consider that and are designed in the way that they allow safe, secure access to and from the metro, including street lighting and similar. Another area of where we believe gender should be integrated is area number 3, which is gender responsive budget circular. To me, actually, that's slightly different than other areas. It's basically government tools to kind of say to their line ministries, when you submit budget policy proposals as part of annual or medium-term budget planning, we want to see how your new budget policy proposals will impact men and women, young and elderly. And often we see countries like Sweden, Austria, Rwanda, and others also requesting that line ministries present sex desegregated data in their line ministries proposals to show how their policy proposals will impact different genders. I mean, having gender responsive budget circular is an important start. It won't necessarily mean that all line ministries will submit budget policies that will show the impact on gender. It does require also raising capacities of line ministries and teaching them, if you wish, how that is to be done. But it can still be a very powerful tool to making sure that this is mainstreamed. Then another 4th area that we look at is how gender responsive is our government's budget proposal documentation. We've seen countries around the world preparing gender responsive budget statements, gender statements. But what we're looking is as part of government's budget proposal documentation, as it's prepared by the government and submitted to the parliament for review, is there a separate section in that budget documentation that presents what are key gender gaps in the society for men and women, and how government is planning to use the budget to address those gender gaps? And does it present also the budget measures, so the allocations that it will give to address to those gender gaps? If those budget measures are not presented, it's sometimes then a bit more difficult to see how the government will be accountable for what it's trying to achieve. And of course, publicizing such a documentation is also an important step in establishing stronger accountability links between the government and citizens. To me, again, I'll go back to the example of Canada. I believe they have one of the best gender budget statements or budget documentation that shows how they're planning to address gender gaps. So I encourage you to go to their website and have a look at that. I do find it extremely kind of empowering in terms of to see how they've addressed major gender gaps in the society and how they're using their budget to address those. So I have 2 polls now before I go into the rest of the framework, kind of just to keep us excited. But let me see if I understand exactly how that should be done. Let me go to my polls.
Yeah, Urshka, take your time to open a pool. It's good to take a minute or two to breathe in and to remember what Urshka shared. And also, I would like to mention once again that in the chat area, you are all welcome to leave question for Urshka already during her presentation, or if anybody wants to share something now, you're also welcome to do it through microphone. Urshka, do you need any help?
I do. Actually, let me just see. I actually think I am getting there to try to open the quiz. Let me see if this works.
Yeah, it's working. You just need to
It's
open
working?
it now. Yeah, I can see it already, but
So I just need to say add, right?
you just need to click open pool now.
Open poll. Perfect.
And now we can
So-
all see it and vote.
Yeah,
Okay,
you can see
super.
it.
So here
Okay,
I'm
guys.
asking you, what, in your opinion, which country was the first country that produced a gender budget statement as I just presented it? So let me see. We have some super clever people in this webinar who are getting this super right. Let me see.
So there is only one question correct, right?
There's only one correct answer, absolutely.
However, there are many great examples.
Yes, but there's only one country that produced a first gender budget statement. Oh, I can see now the results are completely changing.
Guessing it's the H answer. Send kids and names, right?
Okay, super. So it seems that the majority of you believe that the first country that issued a gender budget statement was Canada, followed by Australia, and followed by Sweden. The correct answer is actually Australia. So the Australian government, the Labour Party, introduced first gender budget statement in 1984, so way back. But what the government of Australia did by launching such a gender budget, launching a gender budget statement, it really inspired governments throughout the Commonwealth and countries around the world to start producing gender budget statements. And although after 15 or 20 years, the government of Australia decided to no longer produce gender budget statement with the change of the government, and I think they're now thinking of reintroducing it. It did inspire, as I said, other countries to do so. And all the countries that you see listed here do produce a gender budget statement, and some of them are super cool. So I'll close this poll. I think there's another 40 seconds, so I'm not sure I can rush this one.
Will disappear.
Okay, so I'll try to, in 3 seconds, open another poll that I designed. So me here. So here, in this new poll, I'm asking you what you believe is the right response to the question, what is sex disaggregated data? And you have 4 different options in terms of answers here. But do have in mind that multiple responses are possible here. Okay, I see we still have participants. trying to respond to this question. Kaya, am I right, based on what I see here, that we have 54 participants at this seminar?
Yeah,
Wow,
correct.
this is very amazing, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah.
This is indeed probably the largest webinar on
Super. I'm happy there's
attendees
enthusiasm for gender
so
responsive
far. I
PFM.
think our limits are like 100 simultaneous participants, so we're half full, even more than half full.
Perfect. So I see 45 of you have already responded, and most of you believe that it's any type of data disaggregated by men and women. But actually, I do have to tell you that all 4 responses are correct. This is a definition that's now widely applied on how we define sex disaggregated data. It's established by the European Institute for Gender Equality. So those of you who responded, any of this, all of it, it's all correct. And actually, I'll use this opportunity to go back to my slides and actually introduce you to the indicator number 5 of the PEFA framework that looks exactly at
just the microphone issue has returned, so maybe just readjust it again.
I hope this will be better now.
Yeah.
Okay, super. So thank you again to all of you for responding to this question. As I said, all 4 responses were correct. As I said, to a large extent, gender responsive PFM builds on the power of sex disaggregated data. So our indicator 5 looks at the extent that governments present sex disaggregated data as part of their performance information for service delivery, as part of their plans for the forthcoming year, but also in terms of what was achieved for the last completed fiscal year. Usually we would see that in the overall budget documentation, or we would see in line ministries proposals, for example, for education or health, where government would be presenting the enrollment rates for boys and girls in primary, secondary school, then the average education outcomes for girls and boys, and so forth. Again, this is very important to present in the budget documentation, and a lot of gender impact analysis really builds on this data. Then we're moving from the budget preparation to the implementation. So our indicator number 6 looks at government's capacity to track expenditure for different genders and for gender equality. So to understand that what was promised during the budget preparation was actually implemented, that we don't get to see whenever kind of macroeconomic circumstances change, that always expenditure for gender equality kind of get moved around. And we've seen some great country examples from Italy and Indonesia, although with some flaws, on how that is being done to track those resources. And perhaps Roma can mention in her presentation from Indonesia very briefly on how they track budget expenditure for gender equality in Indonesia. And it's important also that we have the capacity to report on what has been achieved. If in budget proposal documentation, we ask governments to present what are their key gender gaps and how they're going to use the budget to address them. Gender responsive reporting shows what and to what extent that has been done. And again, we have some great country examples. I, for example, personally have been impressed by the government of Andalusia in Spain in their very elaborate gender responsive reporting documentation. And if you have time, it's also in English, I would encourage you to look at it. Then it's important that governments not only do ex ante gender impact assessment, but also ex post evaluations. And that can be done by different institutions, but we've also seen Supreme Audit institutions getting involved in that. I was looking at some of the gender impact reports that have been done in Ukraine that Maya has been anchoring. She'll present soon. And for example, I find one quite impressive finding that 75% of all public servants in Ukraine are women, but 70% of all civil servants traveling on business are men. So when the government established that during the ex post evaluation, is now trying to think how it can address some of the issues coming to equal opportunities program for Ukrainian civil servants. So there's the power of these ex post impact evaluations that governments can use to inform their future budget policy decisions. And then lastly, ideally, the legislature, the parliament would get involved in scrutinizing budget policy proposals as well as budget implementation reports. And again, we've seen some great examples from countries around the world. We have the Parliament of Austria scrutinizing very strongly budget policy proposals. And in Fiji, for example, the Parliament has in their standing orders the requirement that the Parliament needs to look at budget policy perspective from that angle, and have been actually encouraging the government to reform some of the policy proposal in education sector to better address some of the gender gaps for women. So this, I know it's been a lot of information, but hopefully it gives you some flavor on what we're trying to achieve with this new supplementary framework for assessing gender responsive PFM. Just very quickly, if you'll ever get to see a PEFA report on this, each of these 9 key areas is evaluated from D to A. A is the highest score. It means gender is fully mainstream in the area we're assessing. And so all 9 areas are assessed from this on using this calibration from D to A. But do know that for each of the 9 areas of 9 indicators, there's a separate calibration from D to A that applies to the area we're trying to assess. As I mentioned, we actually only started developing this new supplementary framework in late 2018. We then started rolling it out last year. We had 7 countries already testing it, including Ukraine and Indonesia, that will have presented later today. But there seems to be growing traction kind of in countries wanting to apply this framework. Norway has just started applying it. Brussels region in Belgium will apply it soon. But what we've seen is really that there's an interest in countries around the world in mainstreaming gender, in trying to understand to what extent have they already mainstreamed it, and what is the potential to further strengthen gender considerations in PFM. So I'll leave it at this. I'll get Maya and Roma to speak now about how they've been using this framework in Ukraine and Indonesia. What are the lessons learned, strengths and weaknesses? But please do reach out to me. I know Kaya will be sending my email around after the webinar. If you have more questions or post them in the chat, I'll try to respond to them later. Or go to PEFA.org to learn more. And also connect with us on social media. We're super responsive and always eager to learn from PEFA users. So thank you very much for now, but I'm looking forward to your questions in the chat.
Thank you, Urška, for now. I also wanted to mention your website. It's very informative, very nicely presents data that you are tracking. Now we will give word to Maya. Maya?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Well, I put my camera. You are now the presenter, but can you see me now?
It's on and off. Now I can see you on my screen. Yeah.
Okay. Hello to everybody, and thank you very much for inviting. And I think it's also really nice to hear that there are so many people joining. I was glad when I saw the list that you shared, but I was always skeptical how many people would show up. So it's really, really good to see that everybody really showed up. And I have to say, on my end, I would be also very glad to hear from the colleagues around the world about all the questions you may have. So now I would like to share my presentation. Yes, this is always risk for me, whether it will work, and it does. Okay, so as you can see I will have around 20 minutes. And while I will, of course, focus on us piloting the PEFA GRB, or Gender Responsive Public Finance Management Framework in Ukraine, and the lessons and maybe challenges that we had, I would also like first to introduce you with what we have done in Ukraine as for gender responsive budgeting, because I think this will provide for a good context and also perhaps explain how we work and how we saw gender responsive public finance management in Ukraine. So I will start with this slide. I'm very proud of these visuals in this presentation, but I'm starting with showing Maidan. It's the square in Kiev, the main square. And why I show this picture is that when we started working with gender responsive budgeting, these were very challenging times for Ukraine. And after the revolution of independence, they were asking us, and during this time, whether it's now really the time to work with gender responsive budgeting. And our answer was that it was exactly the time. And when I say our answer, is the answer of the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine and then us as a consultants. Because we thought that gender responsive budgeting and the Ministry of Finance thought will help us also understand what is happening with the public funds, who is benefiting from them, because especially in the moment of crisis, economic and otherwise, it was very important to understand what and how are people benefiting from a very scarce funds and how we can possibly target.
Hello, Maya.
I think Maya's connection might have
There are some problems with
lagged a bit.
connection, yeah.
We'll have to wait a bit for her to read.
Let's see what happened. But also, in the meantime, we can again welcome you to share your experience, to share your questions in the chat area. We, for example, saw that Hama is coming back.
Sorry, I could see that something is wrong with the connection. Kaya, I now interrupted you.
No, I was just trying to introduce our chat and everything when we were waiting for you, but you're back, so please, you can go ahead.
So you can see on your slide here, which I will now from beginning. Sorry, do you see the screen? Yes, you do. I'm moving, I'm going through Maidan, and I'm taking you to the slide where I explain who do I mean when I say we. So basically, we have been starting working on gender budgeting in Ukraine now already almost 7 years ago. So it was in the end of 2013, 2014, within the project that is funded by the Swedish government, SIDA, and it's basically to date one of the largest gender responsive budgeting projects globally. The main partner of that initiative was the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine, and I would like to maybe focus our attention to the main objective of the project, which was to increase effectiveness and efficiency in allocation of budgetary funds, taking into account needs of women and men. So the angle that Ministry of Finance of Ukraine wanted to take is to really use gender responsive budgeting as an instrument to help not only achieve de facto gender equality, but improve budgetary process in Ukraine and improve budgetary decision to make them more effective and efficient. And I will just give you some examples of how has that been done. I'm now showing the picture of Ms. Oksana Markarova, who is the Minister of Finance of Ukraine. And I really like the quote where she said, gender budgeting should be at the heart of every budget program. It will work only when all the ministries are basically working with gender responsive budgeting. And this was something that became clear to us when we started working. So now let me just point to the map of Ukraine that you see in front of you. I will not take you to each and every region, but just to tell you that the approach was to basically select pilot oblasts, which are the regions in Ukraine, and pilot ministries, which are the usual suspects when it comes to gender equality. So we started working with Ministry of Social Policy, Ministry of Youth and Sports, Ministry of Education and Science, and of course the Ministry of Finance. And now let me just tell you what the heart of this whole work was. So we were helping government officials who were working in Oblast or the respective ministries to select and then to analyze their budget programs from gender perspective. Now, why did we do that? Because hypothetically, when we started this project, we could have already advised the Ministry of Finance to include gender requirements in their budget circular and in other documents guiding budget process. Because we, of course, understood that, this can be done. However, Ministry of Finance asked for evidence, and they were asking us, okay, can we first see what gender budget analysis of budget programs is showing, and how is this process done? So what we have done, and we have done quite extensively in Ukraine. So we would select the budget program, as I said, for example, in a health sector program for tuberculosis. This is the one that I use a lot, or HIV and AIDS, or diabetes, or whatever other health program you may have. And we would help the health department together with the finance department, together with state statistics service, which is another very important counterpart when it comes to working with gender equality, because as Urshka was mentioning on several occasions, it's the sex disaggregated data and gender statistics that is in essential ingredient when it comes to gender analysis and gender budget work. So we would have these kind of working groups that were analyzing budget programs, and in this case, let me just stick to the example of tuberculosis. For example, in Zhytomyr, you can find this oblast. I don't know if you can see what I'm showing with my mouse. So in Zhytomyr Oblast, we would, for example, pick a program for tuberculosis and have the head of tuberculosis department, the finance department. And that would be the first time for them to look at their program from gender perspective. So one of the first things that you do when you do gender analysis of budget programs is, of course, to collect sex disaggregated data. And in this case, we did not have sex disaggregated data. So it was something that needed to be kind of handpicked. One has to say that this data existed, but it wasn't collected at this level. So we collected the data, and there what we have seen is that more than 80% of the patients suffering from tuberculosis were men. So it's only 20% of those who suffered from tuberculosis are women. But why is that even relevant in the context of our funding? It's because all the preventive measures that when we were looking into this area and generally all over Ukraine, the preventive measures for tuberculosis are targeted in the areas where women predominantly work. So it would be health sector, education sector. So no preventive measures were done in the areas where we've seen that there is a majority of patients coming. So basically this would be rural area, and then people working in mines, especially men working in mines. So as a result of this gender budget analysis, and not only this one showed such a big gaps, the working groups provided recommendations for the Ministry of Health, that is now to collect this sex disaggregated data that previously was not collected or published for the program of tuberculosis, and to also restructure the prevention and measures to take into account this big gender gap that we've seen in this program. So I'm just trying to illustrate, I will move faster, but I really wanted to illustrate the approach of Ukraine, because the approach of Ukraine is very heavily based on this gender budget analysis. So by this point, and you can see that now, if we move also on the screen, you can see that nowadays all the ministries in Ukraine are working with gender budgeting, not within all their programs, but within some specific programs that they have selected. And we also have all the oblasts that are working with gender responsive budgeting. Now, I would move to, yes, this is also a quote that I really like, because I was a part of this working group in one of the other oblasts. This is the head of financial division of social and cultural sector. And when we met, the first thing that he said, I really don't think that we have anything to do with gender equality and gender budgeting. This is not the area that is in the responsibility of the finance department. However, after working with gender budgeting now for already 4 years, he was the first one to give a recommendation to the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine to include gender considerations in the budget code. So, and why was he this convinced? If you ask me, it's because the story, such as the story of and I did not know that this one will be also in health. I have different examples because I already shared with you an example from tuberculosis. But in HIV and AIDS, we've seen quite a similar picture as in tuberculosis. And I have to say that the health issues in Ukraine are actually showing the tendency, I mean, or also a reflection of the fact that women and men in Ukraine have a fairly low life expectancy, and the gap between women and men is very high. So basically, men in Ukraine are even not expected to live until the retirement, because the age where they die on average is 65. And we have seen, when we were looking into the health programs, we were actually seeing these gender gaps showing very prominently, and we were seeing that the preventive measures are not taking this gender gap into account. So as a result of the analysis of the program in HIV and AIDS in this area, they have actually come to realize that the risk group that they are not taking into account are especially men living in remote rural areas. So that's how they set budget funds to purchase now a movable laboratory, and they are already decreasing the cases of a full-blown AIDS by increasing the tests. So I will not go into too many examples, but really what I would like to say to our 54 participants, there are several things. One of the things, how much time do I have? Sorry, I'm mindful of, yeah, it's fine. So I think one of the key things was that in all 300 programs, budget programs that have been analyzed from gender perspective, in each one of them we saw gender gaps. In some of them, there were, I mean, Urshka gave you the example of this, it is additional education and travels for civil servants that is showing this incredible gender gap, which you wouldn't, of course, ever see unless you do gender budget analysis, because this is the budget program that we analyzed. It's not a policy, and it's not a state level program that we call target programs in Ukraine. It's actually the budget allocations that we have managed to understand are discriminatory, because we have used and applied gender budget analysis, and we have, of course, collected sex desegregated data and then went deeper in the analysis. So this is the first message. All the programs showed gender gaps. The second message that I would like to share with the colleagues who will probably engage and work with gender budgeting is that it's incredibly hard to change the budget programs even after you show big gaps. And this has been very challenging for us, because changing the budget programs includes, of course, changing and working with the objectives and the activities and allocations ultimately. And this is quite political. So in order to change them meaningfully, one needs to work with both political level and then the kind of mid-management level, and it's challenging. So this is something that we are working around now. We are trying to kind of facilitate this in Ukraine, but this is something that is coming up. So again, even when there are big gender gaps, it's not enough to show them, but you kind of need to facilitate the change, and that's not easy. So you can see here there are some numbers that you can see. We have a strategy for public finance management that includes gender budgeting. Something that I think is very important to also share is that the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine introduced methodological recommendations for all key spending units. So basically all ministries are actually recommended, which is important for the story, to analyze their budget programs from gender perspective. And they are actually doing that. But what we want to see is that this is mandatory, and this is not yet mandatory, it's just a recommendation. And then you can see that we have a lot of changes in the budget programs at all levels, but we of course want to see more of that, and that's what we want to see in Ukraine. So I will just talk for a few more minutes just to tell you about PEFA gender budgeting assessment in Ukraine. And I have to say, I was honored actually to be part of the team that was developing the framework, and then also had an opportunity to pilot it in Ukraine. And what I have learned personally from piloting it is that the framework for gender responsive public finance management is actually a very good standard of what we would ideally want to see when it comes to integration of gender consideration in a public finance management systems. So it's a very, very comprehensive framework. In fact, we have only 9 indicators. And actually on this slide, there is a little mistake, hoping that nobody will notice, but still, we have gender budgeting indicator number 7, which is gender sensitive procurement, which is now being removed for the time being. So we have 9 indicators. But we applied this framework in Ukraine, so that's why I have this slide in front of your eyes at the moment. So what I wanted to say is that because the framework is so comprehensive, we have also managed to see all the opportunities for integration of gender equality that we didn't work with, because we have been focusing specifically on several of these indicators, which you'll see at the next slide, which were evaluated more higher than D. However, we also understood that there is so much more that we can do. Having said that, I also, and I will ask Urška, I think we agree on that, but I would definitely like to hear from other colleagues. We have also realized that many countries would have only few of these indicators higher than D, but they would have quite good results when it comes to implementation of gender responsive budgeting. So what we are trying to say is that, and Urška already said it in her presentation, this framework is also used to show us where next we can go with gender budgeting. So what do we have for Ukraine? It's not super optimistic, the results that we see. So we have the only indicators that are above D are basically budget circular, sex desegregated data, and then we also see the performance reviews that are also C. So basically, the most important thing that we have seen while piloting the framework is that the performance reviews that we have been doing as a part of this gender budget analysis, that we actually need to make them regular and a regular part of also external evaluation mechanisms such as audit. And we are currently in Ukraine working with audit, using also Austrian experience. I think Urška was mentioning how good Austria is actually in including performance audit in measuring impact of budget programs to gender equality. In the budget circular, this is actually the reflection of also methodological recommendations and the instruction that the Ministry of Finance is sending to key spending units. And then sex desegregated data, we do have around 25% of the budget programs that now do have sex desegregated data as part of the budget documents. So we are still working, I have to say, we are still working on improving the report, and we will probably, we are now actually also trying to improve it from the perspective of the new gender responsive PFM framework that has been updated. We are also now encouraging broader stakeholder consultation with UN Women and NDI, which are also colleagues who have been working with gender responsive budgeting. And after that, we are to develop a roadmap or the action plan on where else we should go with gender responsive budgeting in Ukraine, which again, for now, has been heavily focused on gender responsive budget analysis of the budget programs. So basically, I would maybe stop here for now. I would also say that there are areas in which we would really like, and I would maybe at one point discuss this with Urška and maybe other colleagues, is to in how many countries we would see investment management being gender responsive. because in the countries that I have been working with, this is not the case, unfortunately, because we do know how much public investments, how prominent their impact to gender equality can be. And then legislative scrutiny is also something that is a bit lagging behind, because what we really want to have institutionalized public discussions that have gender considerations as part of them. So not a random one-off MP raising a question about gender equality when it comes to the budget. And then, of course, policy development, which is our first indicator, which to my mind is also one of the most important ones, is that when we are introducing the new policy, whether it's expenditure or revenue, to really grasp and understand the impact on gender equality. So I will rest my case here. I think I'm following the time. Yes, I have 1 more minute. Wonderfully, but perhaps is it time, Kaya, to open for some questions?
Yeah, we are open for question all the time. I can see in chat Urshka posted 2 or 3 messages for us to read. For example, also that some of us are using gender responsive PFM or gender responsive budgeting, right? So that this is not this is interchangeably used. Also, we can see links to the framework. We can also see activities in a region, in countries. There, somebody is mentioning that that there are workshops going on in their country on GRB. Unfortunately, there is not country mentioned, so maybe.
Perhaps I would maybe. Is it now? I mean, is it okay to invite somebody to speak? I mean, I would perhaps do that before, or is it first the Roma? Because I wanted to ask one question.
You go ahead, Maya.
Yeah. So yeah, we have a question about the gender responsive public investment management, and I think this is also part of our PEFA gender responsive public finance management guidebook. So and then also because when preparing it, I know that the Secretariat tried to also find good examples for each of the indicators. So I think that Urshka can share that as well. But what I wanted to say is that beyond applying the PEFA gender responsive public finance management framework, there are some also lessons that, from my perspective, are very important. One of them is that I already said it's very hard to change budget programs, even when we see how they are not extremely effective in reaching the needs of women and men in different socioeconomic positions. So that's one. The second one, that is extremely important to have good cooperation between Ministry of Finance and gender mechanisms. And I think Roma, the next speaker, will tell you a lot about the key drivers in Indonesia who are driving gender responsive budgeting. And indeed, it's Ministry of Women and Child Protection and the Ministry of Finance and others. I leave it to Roma, but this is so super important and extremely hard to achieve. So I'm talking about some challenges and lessons learned. And then the third very important ingredient for the success of gender responsive budgeting is to institutionalize. And even after 7 years working in Ukraine, it has been very challenging for us to really firmly institutionalize gender responsive budgeting as part of the regular budget practices and institutions. So basically to kind of penetrate the budget code and the framework laws, it hasn't been easy. I'm hoping that that we will make it. And then there is somebody who just said that Ministry of Finance being on board and in the driving seat is the key. I absolutely agree with that. I actually think I've dedicated most of my career to convincing and working with Ministry of Finance on gender responsive budgeting. I agree 100%. But that said, I must just offer a little bit of, I wouldn't say reservation, but But the importance of really establishing this communication and coordination with the gender mechanisms, whatever we are talking about, whether it's an institutional mechanism in the executive or legislative government. How much do I know about Supreme Audit Institution in Ukraine? It's they are not yet involved. And we are now starting to work with the audit institutions in Ukraine. This is the last year of project implementation. We are hoping to get some more time to include them, because especially when it comes to performance audit, we want the audit institutions to be strong enough and capable enough to really do gender audit, if not including gender as part of regular performance audit. And I mean, this is much easier said than done, because the gender expertise is an add-on to most of the expertise of the institutions that we are talking about, except for gender machinery or mechanisms. So this has been proven to be also quite challenging, but also quite rewarding. So, I wanted to just invite if we have somebody who would like to make any kind of input, especially can you share some gender indicators related to public investment projects? I think we will collect somehow all the questions and then see what we can. I'm sure we can actually respond to all of your questions and give you some examples or point you to good resources.
Yeah, there is now just in last few minutes, just several questions came in, and some of them you already addressed.
Kaya, is
yeah.
it this is Urchka, if it's okay, I'll just jump in, and I mean thank you, Maya, for kind of setting the stage. I mean, there was earlier a question about the difference between gender responsive budgeting and gender responsive PFM. I think you rightly noted that we're using the term gender responsive PFM, and that is to align with the PEFA terminology. I mean, you will see in the guidance document that we prepared, and I share the links here, is that we use the terms interchangeably. But I think what we also kind of try to strengthen by calling it gender responsive PFM is this importance of integrating gender considerations throughout the PFM cycle, if you wish. So not only in planning your budget policies, but also in implementing them. So trying to integrate considerations of public investment management, tracking, reporting, so forth. I think Maya has already alluded to, so Maya has been working on the design of this framework, and also our colleague Martin Bowen, who's I think is calling us from, calling in from Australia. Regards, Martin. So what we try to do is to really make sure that we think of all these different areas of PFM where gender could be integrated. And yes, Maya is right. We will not see many countries around the world who've integrating it throughout the budget cycle. But one of the purposes of this framework is to also raise awareness, while at the same time not discouraging countries if they get lower scores. But it's kind of to raise awareness how gender could be further mainstreamed. I mean, Maya, you spoke about Supreme Audit Institutions. In the design of this framework, we work closely with Intosai, and they are now also starting working closely with Supreme Audit Institutions globally in trying to conduct gender performance audits. When it comes to public investment management, correct. I mean, we don't see as many countries doing it as, for example, gender budget statements, but we have seen great examples from Canada, Austria, the Philippines, around the world. Even, I mean, the work I was doing last year in the Caribbean, St. Lucia, Antigua and Barbuda and others. So it's kind of starting to think, when I do cost-benefit analysis, what will be the social impact? And can I collect sex desegregated data to determine it? We see there's a lot of interest in procurement indicators. We've had several different iterations of that procurement indicator and testing it around the world. Unfortunately, it's not included in the final version of the framework, not because we believe that integrating gender in procurement is not important, not at all. But what we felt when testing it is that there was not enough well-established international practice at this stage to have that included. But we do encourage countries in doing PEFA assessment reports to explain if they are integrating gender in procurement. But at this stage, that would not be evaluated, scored from D to A. At the same time, some of the issues Maya mentioned, like institutionalization of GRB and what are the stakeholders involved, you might not get that in the PEFA assessment assessed from D to A, but we do encourage teams to write about that because it's really, having it institutionalized, having trained line ministries in collecting and analyzing sex disaggregated data and doing the gender statistics, that's crucial for its success. So as I said, although that would not be evaluated, it's important that this is presented in the PEFA report. I'm quite conscious of time, right? To make sure we also hear from Roma and the great Indonesia experience. So we might actually leave it to Roma now, and then we still hopefully have some time to answer additional questions.
Yeah, I also propose, Maya?
Yeah, I just wanted very, very, very brief intervention to just follow up what Urshka said, if it's okay.
Yeah, shortly. Then we
very shortly. I wanted just to say that I would really encourage, I mean, now piloting, after piloting PEFA gender responsive PFM framework in Ukraine and Indonesia and providing some advice in it in Fiji, I think it's an extraordinary tool, even in the countries that have done very little work on gender responsive budgeting. And why is that? Because in doing this assessment, in preparing this report, this can be used as a very good starting point for the roadmap on where you want to go and what do you want to do with gender responsive budgeting. I only wished we had this framework before we started working in Ukraine, because maybe the design of the project would look completely different, or a bit different. I wouldn't say completely different, but we would certainly make sure that we would also equally target maybe other indicators, and not for the sake of indicators, but for the sake of meaningful integration of gender in the budget cycle. Because I think what is value added of this framework is kind of setting up standards for all of us working with PFM on what do we really want to do and where can we go with gender. So for me, I mean, if there is one message, except for many other messages that I try to share, is to really pilot it, or not pilot it, sorry, apply it, even when you know that there hasn't been so much work going on gender responsive budgeting.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you both for sharing important messages. Now I propose we go next to Roma. Roma, we can already see you, but we cannot hear you. And many in the meantime that we are waiting for Roma. Yeah, Roma, unmute yourself. As I can see, you are muted.
No, it's not muted. It's already unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it. Hi. Okay. Let me, in the meantime, share you my presentation. I think it is. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So thank you everyone. This is Roma. I'm from the World Bank. I'm new to this work, so it has been very exciting to me, and I'm also very grateful with the guidance, the insights that Urska and Maya have been giving to me. So just to give you a bit background, what I'm currently doing. So I'm with the World Bank with the governance practice. We are currently implementing this public finance management multi-donor trust fund. So it is a project that the bank is implementing in Indonesia to support the PFM reform agenda in Indonesia. Basically, we are working with the Ministry of Finance and Bappenas, who actually leading the PFM reform agenda, since the white paper is issued back in 2003. And immediately after that, in 2004, the World Bank provided support big operation for the Indonesian government to establish its IFMIS project, which now then it is already expanded, like helping. We have a modernized, very modernized PFM system. Just to give you a background where I come from in this perspective. So we have been doing this PFM reform like since 2000, basically 2004, but with the trust fund, with the support, well, you see there in the logo, the donors that have been supporting our project. So going back to the gender responsive budgeting, I would like to divide my presentation into these 5 major parts. So I would like to start with the country context, like where I come from. Fortunately, I'm also Indonesian, working in Indonesia. So hopefully I can also give another perspective on how do I actually see the gender responsive budgeting as from me as an Indonesian, not just a person working in the bank or giving or preaching something to the Indonesian government. So that is in terms of the country context. And later on, like Urska and Maya have also been sharing with us. So what actually we are going to do with this framework, yeah. So within everybody knows where Indonesia, it is a big country. I think it is one of the largest archipelago, like from the west to the east. I think it stands like almost 6,000 kilometers, and from the north to the south, it's like it expands like almost 2,000 kilometers. It is also the fourth largest, the fourth most populous nations in the world. Yeah, I don't want to go too detail in this. The Google is always there to help you find out about the country. But one thing that I would like to highlight here is, yes, we have like almost 231 million in population, which almost 50% of it is actually women. But if you're talking about this very highly populated woman, but like Indonesia is considered to be modernized country. But when you're talking about the woman issue, it's still like the patriarchy is still dominates. We are what do you call this? A majority are Muslim country, but I think it's not the religion, a specific religion, but the religion is still dominating the norms, the values, the setting up of the society. That's why then this patriarchy is still very quite dominant in Indonesia. Because of this dominant of the religious, the cultures, yeah, uh, it's quite what do you call this primordial society as well. So it is still common these days. You see early marriage, polygamy, forced divorce, yeah, illegal marriage. So it's still there despite all being modernized. Yeah, a country. I think we are also the fourth, if I'm not mistaken, using the internet. Yeah, in the world, we are very active in social media, but still, all these things are still feature in our society. So that's in terms of the country context. By then you will hope probably, okay, then I will see a quite advanced gender responsive budgeting in Indonesia. One will assume that if we are looking from the where it is started, it is already started back in 2000. That means 20 years ago, we already started the implementation of a gender responsive budgeting with the issuance of the presidential decree. It's actually laid the foundation. This is also what I consider later on is that it's part of the good foundation, the diverse for the gender responsive budgeting. So it's already started in 2000, and it's also specifically also mentions about that the gender mainstreaming needs to be put in the planning and budgeting. So we already started this since 2000, yeah. But so it's 20 years since 2000. A lot of things has been done, yeah, in terms of evaluation by the Ministry of Women Affairs and Child Protection. I think someone told me that Indonesia is the only country in Indonesia that has a separate ministry that deals with the women affairs. Somebody can confirm that, but I think I'm quite right about this. It is actually it is a very good political decisions back in 2000, early 2000 after the reform, that our president sees that there is a need to have a special ministry that actually deals with women. with women issue, gender issues. Yeah. So that's in terms of the background of the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection. So as you see also after that, the evaluation shows that there are some trends that doesn't really confirm where this GRB going in terms of progress or that is lacking. So I think it made some of the central governments like Bapanas, Bapanas is in Indonesia, Ministry of Planning and Ministry of Finance and also the Ministry of Women thinks that, okay, the evaluation shows that after 10 years, there is no progress where this gender responsive budgeting have brought the country to. So that is why back in 2012, they issued this what they call as a national strategy that actually provided what back then was a stronger foundation for the country to actually include the gender responsive planning and budgeting. That means because they see the last 10 years, the GRB didn't actually bring anything. So they thought there has to be a new strategy, a new strategy to accelerate that gender mainstreaming. So they were hoping that they would like to see more result on that. So that is one thing. And also it is the point where they thought that we need drivers in the central government. Yeah. So that's why they decided that the Ministry of Women Empowerment, Ministry of Planning, because actually because this focus is so much on the planning stage that the country, our country has a different, I think quite different system where planning is actually separated from the budget. That is why these two ministries were also included in the drivers for the gender planning and budgeting. And the third driver is, of course, the Ministry of Finance, because this is dealing with the allocations. And the fourth drivers is the Ministry of Home Affairs. Ministry of Home Affairs is actually our ministry that deals with the subnational governments. Since 2000, Indonesia is also taking decentralization. So a lot of national budget is also transferred and used at the subnational government. That is why Ministry of Home Affairs is also included in the drivers. So that is in terms of the history of the Indonesia gender responsive budgeting. Yeah, every year the Ministry of Finance will also revise a regulation that provides a reference for line ministry to prepare their budget documentation. In this regulation, it also includes the need to include the gender proposal, gender budget statement, a gender analysis pathway whenever they submit the budget to show to confirm that okay, they're actually doing the gender budget responsive. But I don't want to spend my time a lot on that. Yeah, that's just to show the journey that the Indonesia on Indonesia gender responsive budgeting for 20 years. Yeah, and you will see that it is so much focused on the planning and the budgeting side only. So no wonder I think first everybody wasn't seems to be what do you call this there seems to be a missing link, right? They only see the planning, they only see the budgeting. Even the planning and budgeting, there always a one also see there is a gap. No one can actually tell what budget and when it is already submitted. Can we see the result? What are the outputs? Is it included in the report? No one can actually see it. So even the planning, the next planning was not provided based on the result of the previous planning. It is more like a routine. It is more like what do you call this? Like business as usual. You have to submit your budget. Okay, but to be approved, to get the approval, then you need to attach your budget documents or your budget proposal with all these documents, with all these requirements, the gender budget statement, the JFA. So it's more like a business as usual. No one actually really sees, okay, why do we have to do this? What are the results? I mean, are we getting something when we do all these things? No one actually do that. So that's why with all these steps, with all this history, the result is not yet there. This is just to show you who are the four drivers which I mentioned earlier. So Bapenas is actually the Ministry of Planning, which basically responsible for the policy for formulation. Ministry of Finance is dealing with the budget. MOWCP, Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, is again the ministry that actually provide the foundation for the gender equality issues with the child, with the family, and later the fourth driver is Ministry of Home Affairs. So what about the PEFA GRB assessment in Indonesia? So I will not go to indicator by indicator, but I just give you some the summary of the scores and where is Indonesia. So I think overall Indonesia seems to be better than Ukraine. Sorry, Maya. So, but overall, in terms of these indicators, I think it seems that Indonesia is advancing in some area. For example, on the budget circular, on the budget documentation. Explain a bit on this. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, every year our Ministry of Finance will issue a regulation that that provides a guideline how the line ministry should prepare their budget. Yeah, so it has a very good content in terms of what are required. For example, this gender budget statement, it does provide what do you have to prepare in the gender budget. It has to have a clear outcome, a clear result. So it is mentioned there, it is provided in that. And so is also the budget documentation. Unfortunately, in other area, we are still lacking. But again, this is also related to the fact that so far, the gender responsive budgeting in Indonesia is so much focused on the planning, on the budgeting. It doesn't really look, okay, if I want to prepare a good planning, what do I need? Yeah, do I have enough money? Is there any enough fiscal for me to allocate this budget? There is no such things for Indonesia for the country at the moment to prepare that kind of planning that is addressing this gender equality. So that is why I think this PEFA framework is actually a good thing, and I think now also it provides a good momentum for the country to start with. I think Maya earlier mentioned that they have done all this project before the framework is introduced. So in that way, it seems that the project design may not necessarily be able to address the framework. But for Indonesia context, especially for our project, I think this is a really good context. This is really good opportunity for the country to look at that, to be able to address a good, what do you call this? I think I will agree to use now the gender responsive PFM, because it actually covers the full cycle of the PFM. Now, I think with all this result, I think about Indonesia, especially when we discuss with the four drivers, they seems to be agree that, okay, yeah, we cannot just focus on the planning and budgeting. It has to cover the whole thing that we can, apart from the preparation of the planning. So we're talking about revenue and expenditure policy. What about this public investment? Yeah. And then planning and budgeting. And then how is it implemented? How is it monitored? How is it evaluated? Yeah. And then going back again to the input on the revenue and expenditure policy, and the same cycle will come. So sorry, I think you still see this procurement, because I think this is still using the old not the old, I said like the before it is final that the procurement is no longer part of the framework. But I think it's good to remove this procurement, because anyway, Indonesia's scores is G here. But yeah, this is just to show you what are the scores. I'm happy to share also here for the specific here the discussion, but I'm conscious about the time, so I will not go one indicator, but as Urska already asked before, I would like to spend more time on this tracking budget expenditure for gender equality. Although we are C at the moment, yeah, but I think we are also making good, because actually what it shows in the current system, despite of the weaknesses actually we can see what are actually the expenditure on the gender tag program that is allocated. Yeah, so you can see how much is the allocation for gender tag output, because actually the government put certain code, like if this is claimed to be gender tag output, then you need to put certain code in there, and later you can see what is actually the total allocation. And later, because of this code that is given to specific gender tag program, then you can also see what are the expenditure or the realizations of that allocation. That is, I think, what Urska wanted me to spend more time on this. The only problem with that is, okay, you know the allocation for gender tag program, you know the expenditure of that allocation, the realizations of that allocation. Why this is still C? Is because we don't report the realization of that the realization of that allocation that is related to gender tag. What is the output? No, we don't report that. That is why we don't get score A here. We only able, if you want, yeah, if you want, or if you want, you can come to the disbursement office at the Ministry of Finance to see what are the realization. You can do that, but it is not reported. Yeah, it is not reported. It is not shown anything. Yeah, you can only ask, or you can only see the information if you ask for it. Yeah, but I think the foundation is already there. You can actually do it. See what is the expenditure, because the system, the coding is already used. I think this is also applies to other policy. Now our government is also putting what they call this promoting the climate change and also infrastructure as the priority in addition to gender. So for example, gender tag program will use 3003 as a code, and for infrastructure, because it is also the main priority of the government, it used, I think, code of 001. And for climate change, it used 006, for example. So if you want to see, okay, how much is the budget, the allocation for gender, then you just give code 003, then it will show you what are the allocation across 87 line ministry at the central government, and so is also for other. And you can also see that, okay, I want to see the program that is also, that it's not just gender, but also related to infrastructure, to climate change. Then you can always get the number if you put these three codes in all together. So this is just to describe you about the how it is actually done. Sorry, do I speak very fast? Just stop me if I speak very fast.
No, everything is okay.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's just to give. I think colleagues here can get more details on each indicator.
And we will be sharing the
like
whole presentation,
Okay.
so they will see also all indicators in your presentation.
Okay. So now let me just go to the next part. I think we are done with the This is just the overall look of it. So we have 2B, we have 1C, and then the rest are at D at this moment. So it looks like this now instead of a complete or perfect spider graph. So I think, yeah, again to give you, okay, the foundation for the gender responsive budgeting. I think this is what we learned from the assessment. Yes, so far I think Indonesia has a very good regulatory framework for the gender responsive budgeting. I mean, as I mentioned earlier in the journey, that back in 2000, it has a good framework, but it has a good legal framework. It has laid a very good foundation. I think the commitment seems to be there even from our constitution. It actually protects. It actually gives the same rights, yeah, the same protection to all citizens of the Indonesia, regardless their sex. So it actually started from there, yeah. So that is in terms of the foundation. And as I said, also the Ministry of Finance every year issued a reference for the budget preparation. It actually also provided guidance to the ministry about how that they should select the outputs that is relevant for gender equality. Yeah, it's also Indonesia also has a very good and established institutional mechanism. As I mentioned, we have 4 drivers. Yeah, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Women Empowerment, Ministry of Home Affairs. And now, since the introductions of the village level administrative government, now the government, our government is also introducing the 5th drivers. The 5th drivers, Ministry of Village, Ministry of Village. Yeah, because now I think the money is before, I think at the decentralization time it's at the district level. Now I think it will go even lower to the village level. So most service delivery is also delivered at the district at the village level. That is why they consider it is very important, it is very strategic to also include the Ministry of Village as a 5th drivers. It is the framework for that is being finalized now by the State Secretary. Hopefully, it will be finalized very soon. And the third foundation for the implementation of gender responsive budgeting, in my opinion, and also from the framework, is yes, it's because the government issued several tools to help implement GRB, such as like the budget circular, the gender budget statement, the tracking expenditure, the coding that I explained later on. So these are the things which I consider it's there. It is already, it is a condition. Yeah, it is a condition for the country to be able to implement the gender responsive budgeting. Without all these things, I do not think the GRB can be implemented. I'm not saying yet about the quality, yeah, but these foundations are necessary for us, yeah, for us to to define or to develop tools or actions later on. Let me give you also example. There is some debate last week at the Ministry of Planning to remove gender equality from the main themes. I think at the beginning of my slide, I mentioned that gender equality is one of the 6 themes that is included in the 5 years development plan. 5 years development is actually the guidance for our government, to decide what will be the program in 5 years of the current government. Yeah. So we were hearing last week that gender was almost excluded from this medium term plan. Everybody was panicked because even if you put the gender as a standalone framework, it may still have it will still have challenges. Now, if you exclude it, yeah, if you put it like under some other theme, it won't get any support. So this is, again, I'm just explaining, this foundation is there as a good start for the government, yeah, to be able to develop plan and strategy later on. Of course, challenges are always there, as I said earlier. Despite of the strong foundation, the country is also still facing all these challenges. Like I mentioned, it is not clear at the moment, yeah, what is actually the role of the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection. Yeah, even among the drivers, they also have this question. Okay, who's actually doing this? Okay, we do the budget, we do the planning, but when you're talking about the gender equality issue, who is actually putting all this policy? Who is actually translated it into strategic or principle guidance implementing agenda? So it's not clear, yeah. So that is why we said there currently the top-down policy is missing, yeah. If the government wants to to include gender equality as one of its important themes or its one priorities, then there has to be a top-down policy that says this is how it has to be done. Each line ministry will have to address this, and this is how it is addressed. At the moment, it's not. I think it is still sporadic, yeah. And I would also add that it's still also ad hoc. Why ad hoc? This is also related to the point 2 and the third. It's because, yeah, if you have a good minister, yeah, that has a very strong, a good gender response awareness, a very good commitment, you will see the gender responsive budgeting will actually be implemented, be effective. But again, this is ad hoc. It's not yet institutionalized. It's not yet strategically included in the policy of the central government. Like I don't know whether all of you are familiar with our Ministry of Finance, Sri Mulyani. I think she is one of the very popular Ministry of Finance in the world. She was also the former managing director of World Bank. She's a very strong woman and very committed to gender responsive budgeting. That is obvious. Ministry of Finance is actually on the top of the quality of implementation of gender responsive budgeting. But again, it's because of her. It's very personal. Yeah, it's not yet because her strong personality, her strong leadership, then she can institutionalize this at her ministry. At the moment, her ministry is just one line ministry. It's not representing the quality of the central government in terms of the gender responsive budgeting. So yeah, so that's what I said, because the top-down policy is missing, and therefore it is obvious if you see the gender responsive awareness is also lacking, especially among the leaders. I mentioned earlier, maybe it's just Ministry of Finance like Sri Mulyani, who actually who is open, yeah, and very sensitive of all this gender equality. She's also the one who is actually asking, okay, you said there is 5% of gender of allocation that is for the gender tech program, but I haven't seen the result. I only hear this from her. I didn't hear this from other minister who actually spend more money. Yeah, like Ministry of Public Works. I think it is the highest. I think it is about 30% claim to have a gender tech output. But I don't see this minister also asking what is the result in addressing the gender equality. Yeah, so that is related to it. And like for example, now our state secretary, yeah, he doesn't have the gender responsive mind in his thinking. He actually have been holding up the decree that is required to implement the gender responsive budgeting more efficiently in the future. It is still now with him. It's because he has issue. Do we need this, or why are we doing this? Isn't this adding to the current business process? We already have enough with this. I think that let's just focus on the current reform. Don't put this, because I'm very sure when we do this reform, the gender equality is automatically addressed. So this kind of awareness that he still have. That's why now the challenge is still there. Finally, I also like to bring all this issue on the lack of coordination between planning and budgeting. But I think this is more. This is not just focusing on the gender equality, gender responsive budgeting. There is a broader and it is very latent issue at the moment in Indonesia. It is disconnected between planning and budgeting. This will follow. That is why, okay, whatever happened in the planning, once it is out, goes to the budgeting. No, actually, the Ministry of Planning will not automatically know what happened with the budget. That is what happened with the plan that is that is claimed to be gender tech program, for example, and even the result is not putting back to the planning stage. So it's always like that. So there it is disconnected. So it is also the problem why we haven't seen, we were not yet able to see the result of the gender responsive budgeting at the moment. So these are the sub challenges, but I think this is quite fundamental that one needs to address. So way forward, yeah. So we already learned about what are actually the situations of Indonesia from the indicator 1 to the indicator 10. No, sorry, maybe 9. So yeah, again, I think this is really good momentum for us, and I'm so happy to hear that when we consulted, when we shared this with the government, with the 4 drivers, yeah, that they were so happy to see the result. Not the result actually, but the framework itself. I don't think they were quite happy with the result, because I see a lot of this there. What happened? So they were worried. I think at first they were so worried about the result. No, don't show us only this. Show us more better. But we explained that this is not about the scores. Actually, it is more about where are you now in terms of the system. Are you already good in terms of the planning? Are you already good in terms of the budgeting? So we explained that way to them, and they're happy to know that, oh, actually, this provided a good reference for us, and then remind us again that okay, we still have homeworks to do. So I think it is good. I mean, we got the buy-in from the government. They agree that these are the issues that they have to address. So and so we're happy. I'm happy also personally as part of the project with the World Bank that we will be able to address this later. So the result of this framework will be used by the government to develop their roadmap. I think Maya at her presentation already briefly touched on the roadmap. So roadmap is more like a, what do you call this? Like a commitment for the government to address all these 10 indicators. Yeah, and it will include on what are actions needed. In the presentation, you will see what are actually actions, who are actually the line ministry that is responsible for that. So that is what we will prepare. The bank will help government to prepare that roadmap. And especially for the gender responsive budgeting itself, it will also be having a separate component under the Indonesia Public Finance Management Phase 3. Just to give you a background on the Phase 3, we are now actually at the end of the Phase 2 of our program. Very soon, we will launch our Phase 3. So I'm very happy that this framework is done on timely manner. Hopefully, we will be able to finalize the roadmap soon so that it can be used also to help us design and help government if they need, yeah, to improve all these 10 in the areas that are mentioned in the framework. As you see in my presentations that gender responsive budgeting is actually included in the quality of expenditure as a set framework, but it covers the whole indicators that is already covered in the framework. I think I want to stop there. I'm open for the question and any feedback to the presentation. If you want to have some clarification, feel free. I'm sure Kaya will also share my email, so you can always we can always be in touch after this. So yeah. So thank you very much to give me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Roma. It was interesting to see not only the pilot test development, but also next steps you are planning. Roma, there's actually a question in the chat area. So I know that we are now 50 minutes beyond time set. So maybe, Roma, can you look at the chat area and see what the question is and maybe try to respond or try to prepare a short response, and maybe I would now go for closing. I will give a word to Urshka and Maya for some closing remarks, because I'm glad that so many of you are still here, but yeah, we are closing soon. Urshka, you are waiting, right?
Sure. And well, I think at the end, I just want to thank you, Kaya, for organizing this and for so many participants coming to listen to gender responsive PFM presentation and being interested in it. I am sure we have not responded to all the questions, but I am more than happy to take those extra after the webinar. But all in all, I'm super happy that, Maya, Martin, and I started working on this at the beginning of last year. But since then, we've seen really this kind of gaining traction, being applied globally. So we could not be happier that this is happening. And we want to thank people like Roma, who've taken on this tremendous job in piloting it in Indonesia and elsewhere. So we hope it continues to be an important additional asset for governments when they're trying to design their policies, incorporating different needs of men and women. So thank you all for listening in, and good luck with all your work.
Thank you, Urshka. You already provided many answers in the chat area. Of course, yeah, we will also see if something hasn't been covered, we will coordinate and then provide additional explanations, and thank you very much for giving us a chance to do this webinar together with PEFA Secretariat. Maya is also waiting. Maya is also waiting, I can see.
Yes, I of course also want to thank you for organizing this. I always miss participants' engagement, but I would really like to see all the 54 faces and kind of talk about the work of gender responsive budgeting. I mean, I always have this one kind of I don't know, motivational quote or something, but we have been working with gender budgeting for quite some time. And I don't know enough about the problem of our participants, but if I can do one thing is to encourage you really to engage and start working with gender responsive budgeting. It's a very, very interesting and rewarding area. And I am sure, I mean, for me, the more I work with it, the more I'm understanding that this is really the way that public finance management should work and be inclusive and be aware of the climate change and of gender issues, and then work towards sustainable development. So I think we are all here for all of you, and I don't want to speak on behalf of my colleagues. I even want to speak also on behalf of Roma and Ushka, and Martin, who is somewhere there. So yes, just start working with gender budgeting and ask for anything that you may need.
Thank you, Maya. Also, Roma, you wanted?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think again, like I'm very new to this framework and also to this learning session. So I really appreciate the opportunity that is given to me, and I would also like to welcome and actually encourage other colleagues, other friends to give feedback and also raise questions, because it's actually part of the sharing and also improving like our own capacity, right, to be able to contribute to the works that we are currently doing, like to hear what other is doing in what other colleague is doing in other country, what are their experience, how they actually address some challenges. It will actually be serving as a good input to us. The reason I highlight this thing is because we also have been receiving requests from these 4 drivers on the how actually other country is doing. Yeah, what is their quality of the gender responsive budgeting in those country, how we can learn from them. So I have been receiving, so I think it's also good to hear from all of you from different experiences on this. So yes, so thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to engaging with all of you in the future.
Thank you, everybody. We can also see a lot of appreciation in chat area. And I also must admit that I'm amazed how lively discussions are, what is happening in countries, these pilot testings, projects, webinars, cooperation with SAIS, etc., etc. So I'm wishing everybody good job. Unfortunately, we have to say goodbye for now, but maybe could be good. Smaya was saying that we can meet, next year, same day or a similar time, and recreate webinar with all faces and maybe even more participatory. Anyhow, we will be sharing presentations. Also, we will try to cover those questions that we didn't manage to answer, but thank you very much for posting them, and thank you again, participants, for joining us, and hope that we will have chance to meet again. Have a nice day, or good night, or
bye bye.
Lovely day. Good morning.
have a good day, Urshka, and good night, Roma.
Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Oh, bye.
Bye.